Hi doll faces, welcome to another Self-Love September video. I am very much enjoying putting these resources out, thinking about a bunch of different things that have been interesting me and different things that have been speaking to me on my journey. But I also made sure before I started writing notes for any of the videos I was going to put together for this month that I asked on a Facebook live stream what kinds of things you guys would want to see. And lots of people got involved with that Facebook live stream and talked to me about the stuff they wanted to see. So quite a few of the videos in this series are actually based off of requests from people who joined in with that Facebook live or left comments afterwards, and I want to say I really appreciate any of you whose questions I've answered with resources this month. You really helped me to just get a handle on what you have been going through and how I can help you and speak to your needs. So one of the requests that I received in that Facebook live that was so interesting was a request from somebody asking, can you make a video about how to avoid turning out like your parents, how to avoid inheriting negative traits from your parents, and how to deal with the fact that you might be seeing negative character traits coming up that you know you've inherited from parents. How do you deal with that? And quite a few people liked that comment, which showed me that there is an interest in this, and it really interested me so much from a personal perspective, and also it's a conversation I have with clients a lot. So I want to speak to that today. I want to talk about how you can deal with seeing negative character traits that come from your parents. What can you do about it? Is there anything that you can do about it? And how can you proceed forward? So essentially, we can notice negative character traits coming through from our parents regardless of how much time we spend around them. So some people will try to limit the amount of interactions they have with their parents so that they can actually limit the extent to which they feel that the inherited characteristics are rubbing off. But obviously not all of it comes from nurture, some of it comes from nature as well. So even if you don't necessarily spend a great deal of time around your parents, or you don't see them really exhibiting so much the negative character trait that you know is rubbing off on you, you will see it coming through in your behaviour, even if you don't have that direct influence there of time spent with that parent. And in fact, a lot of people who are adopted, who go on to meet their birth parents and their birth families, will say that they recognise that there are lots of behaviours in common, lots of weird little tendencies and things, behaviours that you see in each other, you see in your birth family, and you're like, I've never seen you do that before, I've never known you before today, and yet here we are doing the exact same thing. Or, you know, that little gesture that I thought was so unique to me is actually from you. So it can be amazing how much comes through in that tiny percent of DNA that makes you family rather than not necessarily family. The main reason that I come across time and time again for why people tend to say that they don't want to turn out like their parents and they want to try and avoid that is because they recognise how much their parents' behaviours actually harmed them, and how some of the stuff that they were exposed to by their parents actually really had this effect on them that made them grow up with certain complexes or certain issues, and they don't want to pass that on to their children or make other people around them in their vicinity feel the way that their parents made them feel. So it is almost a form of social responsibility and an act of love to decide that you don't want to exhibit the same character traits that your parents exhibited with you. Lots of people come to this work of wanting to break down the negative character traits that they've inherited from parents once they start to see themselves exhibit those character traits. So let's say that you grew up in a household where your father was always giving you and your siblings and your mum the silent treatment. He would never open up about what was going on with him. If you hurt him, if you disappointed him, he would just go and lock himself away in his man cave and not talk to anybody, and he would have everything brushed under the rug with his silence. He was unwilling to communicate. And let's say that you then grow up and you recognise that you have a tendency to do the exact same thing. Rather than actually vocalising what the issue is and communicating with your family, you sort of strop away, you sulk, you lock yourself away somewhere, and you give everyone the silent treatment. At some point, as you're engaging in that behaviour, you stop and you think to yourself, okay, this is a learned behaviour, and when I feel like I'm in a stressed situation, when I'm backed into a corner, when I don't know how to handle my emotions, I revert back to that very strong, very ingrained neural pathway, which comes from being conditioned to see that as something that a parent did as a form of stress relief, as a form of escapism, as a form of control around the situation. So now I do the exact same thing. Through this moment of shimmering self-awareness, you are then able to bring yourself to a point of empathy with those in your family that you might be hurting. So you might think about how badly it hurt you when your father would just shut down and play the silent treatment card and go off and not talk to anyone for a few days. and you'll think about how harmful that was, how damaging that was, how much you saw that it hurt your mum and your siblings, and then you will think to yourself, okay, so now as I'm stepping into the shoes of my family members, I'm recognizing I'm probably making them feel the exact same way. I'm perpetuating the vicious cycle, and I want to stop doing that. And this is a moment of very, very holy illumination with a very practical application. It's not just the kind of illumination where you're like, oh, you know what, I've realized I do that. It's like something where you can actually take action to break a cycle that might have been going on for generations previous to your father. Your father might have learned it from one of his parents, you learned it from one of their parents, and actually you're going to be doing the work to be a cycle breaker. And I'm going to talk more about that for the remainder of 2018. I want to talk about cycle breaking. I want to talk about the archetype of the cycle breaker, how we can deal with a parent who's a cycle breaker, and how we can be one ourselves. So consider this to be a little bit of a prelude of the kind of thing I'm going to be talking about when I go more into cycle breaking as a concept. So once you're armed with that information, with that awareness that you are doing something that is learned behavior from a parent, and you see that it has negative consequences, then you actually get to make the decision not only to change your behavior and improve family life, but actually to break a cycle, to be that person who takes it in hand, who breaks something over their knee that has been a scourge on the familial situation, perhaps for generations. And you decide that you're going to take things in a different direction, and you're not going to pass that on to your family or make other people around you suffer for it. And that is power. That is the path of the heart warrior, 100%. That is what I'm here for. That is what I live for. That is what makes me tingle all over my body, is the idea of that. I love that. It is definitely much better and much healthier to be as specific as you possibly can about the behaviours from your parents that you do not want to exhibit than it is to be super general about it. So you'll hear lots of people say, I never want to end up like my mom. I never want to do the same shit my dad does. I never want to be that kind of person. But a lot of the time that comes from a place of anger. It comes from a place of wound in the psyche. It comes from a place of resentment, and there's nothing wrong with expressing that resentment, but it doesn't tend to get much done because you're not being specific about what it is that you want to avoid, why you want to avoid it, and how you intend to purposefully go about changing it. So in the example I gave before, where your father, you know, plays the silent treatment card and goes off and curls up with his wound instead of talking about it, you in that case can be very specific about the kind of behavior that you are wanting to avoid. You're wanting to avoid shutting down communication. You're wanting to avoid suppressing. You want to allow yourself to express and to allow others to express. And the reason that you want to avoid those kinds of behaviors that your father exhibited is because it makes people feel this way. It gives people this impression. It leaves you bereft of certain things that you need, and you go into it and you're specific about it. The more specific you can be about why you want to avoid these particular traits, the more you actually can take action, because you can decide that you're going to take risks by changing the learned behavior that you resort to when you feel stressed or when you feel like you don't know what else to do. And then you can monitor the results of changing that behavior and moving out of your comfort zone. You can't do that if you're just slapping a general angry label on it that says, I don't want to be like my mum, you know, my mum's a dick, I don't want to be like her. Obviously we express those kinds of things when we're angry, when we feel let down, when we feel disappointed, and there's definitely a place for expressing those kinds of things, there's no doubt about it, but those kinds of things aren't useful. They're not really going to help you to change anything or get anything done. So I invite you, as part of your Self-Love September work this year, to think about the exact traits and behaviours, mindsets, etc., whatever the case may be, that you want to avoid, that you recognise you might be in danger of inheriting from your parents, or you may already have seen yourself exhibiting them and knowing that they came from your parents. I invite you to think about why you want to make sure that you are not giving power to those traits and those behaviours, why you want to make the changes, what would be the positive results of making those changes. Get super specific, because that's where it becomes very fizzy and very useful. If you're with me so far and you think this sounds wonderful, then the next point that I want to make is very important to take on. Do not throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to wanting to avoid certain traits or certain behaviours that your parents have exhibited around you when they were raising you, etc. Make sure that insofar as possible, you take your exploration to a space that is neutral and empowered. So I want to give an example of this. Let's say that you were raised in a household where your mother was prone to extremely angry, rageful outbursts, and instead of communicating in an open, honest, vulnerable way where you could have an interaction and you could feel like she was expressing and you were expressing and it was a safe environment, she would erupt, and the anger was just palpable. It was just It eviscerated any opportunity for anyone else to have a chance to speak, and it also broke down the sense of safety in the household. As a strong response to that, in your desire to avoid exhibiting that same characteristic that your mother exhibited, you may actually go on a mission to eradicate anger from your character completely. Now, this is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Anger as a response is natural, it's normal, it's understandable, and it definitely has its uses. So we want to make sure that we create a relationship with the emotion of anger and the experience of anger which is neutral, rather than deciding that we want to push it so far away from us that we never exhibit it in our character, we never feel it, and we shame ourselves deeply whenever we do feel it. Obviously, that side of things we really want to avoid. We want to make sure that we don't slip into that kind of territory, because it's a mistake to believe that you have to completely eradicate whatever was present in your parent in order to kind of repay the familial karmic debt or get things back to how they should be. You're still human, you're still going to have experiences that are going to cause you to exhibit certain emotions or behave in certain ways. So what you want to do is recognize that the exact way in which a parent was exhibiting an emotion or dealing with a situation is not the way that you want to go, but the way of dealing with that is to bring things back to a state where you feel you can have your own relationship with that emotion, you can have your own relationship with that kind of scenario, you can deal in your own way with that kind of person who is a trigger for your parent, whatever the case may be. So it's about you forging your own path. It's not about you being very, very reactionary by taking whatever was exhibited by your parent and actually swallowing it down, stuffing it down, hiding it in yourself. That's going to create a whole new set of problems. So that's definitely something that you are going to want to think about as you go along on this journey. If you notice that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, try to bring yourself back to a space of neutrality where you recognize that you're trying to forge your own connection with whatever was problematic for a parent, and that doesn't necessarily involve trying to go completely extremely in the other direction to the point where you are denying yourself the opportunity to be in your beingness and feel your own feelings and have your own experiences. Try to avoid shaming yourself, and when you recognize that you are shaming yourself, stop and be with yourself in that moment. One of the biggest things that is a huge problem for people who worry about turning out like their parents is shaming themselves whenever even a remote shred of that kind of behavior turns up in a situation or in a conversation, and that shame goes very, very deeply into the psyche and it poisons the well. So we need to recognize that even just our willingness to be conscious of what we are doing, what we are saying, and even our willingness to decide that we want to do things in a different way, we want to take that power back, is incredible. That's nothing to be ashamed of. That is amazing work. And if you're doing that work, I commend you, I salute you, and I want you to commend and salute yourself. It sounds like I'm getting a bit military now, but I want you to really honor yourself, honor the power of that work and what it entails. It is amazing. And look, there's absolutely no way really to avoid exhibiting character traits from parents if you were around your parents for any length of time. And as I said at the beginning, sometimes maybe even if you fucking weren't around your parents very much, we inherit these things. It's okay. Shaming yourself for naturally exhibiting tendencies and characteristics and traits or flaws that you have been around that formed the foundation of your earliest conditioning in life doesn't make any sense. It's actually not logical, you know. So even if you feel very deeply that sense of shame whenever something like that comes up, you've got to think about how that shame is such a waste of your emotional energy. You're draining your life force, allowing yourself to continue to experience and enforce that deep-rooted shame, because who the hell is not going to exhibit some characteristics that they were exposed to from their earliest moments of life? Who the hell is not going to exhibit some characteristics that have come through in their genetics, in their DNA? It's not possible. It's not possible. So you're shaming yourself for something that is out of your control, when what I'm asking you to do is to honor yourself for making a decision to accept what is within your control, which is the ability to decide consciously why you want to do things differently and how you're going to go about doing that. How you're going to take those steps to decide to behave in a different way and live your life in a different way. That is work to be honoured and commended. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Don't forget that you can choose your own values and you can choose your own principles. You know, you were raised around a certain set of values and principles, or a number of sets of values and principles that will have had an effect on you for better or worse. But don't think that when you grow up you can't select your own. Deciding on what your principles are, what your ethics are, the moral standpoint that you want to live your life around and make your decisions based on is very empowering for people who feel like they are somehow destined on railroad tracks to become like their parent and there's just nothing that they can do about it. Obviously, that is a very disempowering feeling. It's also a feeling that's based on a fiction. It's not true that you can't take a different path to your parents. That's not true. But we need to kind of recognize our empowerment by deciding what are our ethics, what are our beliefs, what kind of manifesto or mission statement are we working with. Don't be afraid to be creative around this. You know, allow yourself to write down some ideas, write your manifesto, write your mission statement, think about your ethics, your beliefs, and why those are your ethics and beliefs. Don't be afraid to decide that you're going to break with principles that you were taught as you were growing up and find and foster your own principles. That can be incredibly empowering, and for a lot of people it can be the first step to recognizing that they absolutely do have the ability to take a different road to their parents in many respects. Don't forget to think about the positive things that you inherited from your parents. Even if you don't particularly like a parent, or you don't spend time with them anymore, you don't have a relationship with them, or they're not your favorite person in the world, and you may still be processing anger towards them or whatever, there's no doubt that there are some good qualities, some character traits, some interesting abilities that that parent has afforded you that you can feel happy for and thankful for. And I think sometimes that just brings you to that place of neutrality, when sometimes your feelings, when you're trying to eradicate certain tendencies that you see from your parents that are negative, can get really intense and really overwhelming. Sometimes I think it's just good to think, oh, you know, well, at least I got my good memory from him, or at least I got my good cooking ability from her, or whatever. And really just honour that, you know, make sure that you spend time thinking about the good things that you inherited from them that can be useful, that are of value to you. I also feel like some of the crappy things that we inherit from our parents can have good sides. All of the shadow stuff within you has a seed of light in it as well. You know, like somebody with an anger problem at least can see the light side of their anger problem, the conscious side or the active side of their anger problem, as being an ability to be forthright, an ability to be assertive, an ability to defend yourself. And even when I was working through my own problem with rage, and I've made a video about that on the channel, I'll leave it down below for anyone who's interested. Even when I was working with my rage problem, I would always think to myself, you know what, the sort of conscious side, the useful side of this rage problem is that it is evidently a representation of my willingness to assert myself and to stand up for myself when it counts. You know, I can defend myself. I'm not afraid to speak and to come forward and to be empowered. And that was what I saw as kind of like the shiny conscious side, the useful side of my anger problem. I saw that I had a massive problem with rage and that needed to be dealt with, but I also was willing to see how that could be turned to the good, or how that could represent something in me that could be useful and that I could be happy about. So don't forget to do that as well if you possibly can do. I'm going to end this video by reminding you that it's very important that you recognise the difference between what is your journey and what is your parents' journey. You cannot do the work for them. You cannot do the work of their self-development for them. You are not obligated to do the work of their healing for them, and it is impossible for you to do that for them. So don't try. Recognise the difference between what is yours to deal with and what is yours to settle on trying to improve, and then what you need to leave for them to do. When you recognise some of the difficult traits, the negative characteristics that have come through due to the behaviours of your parents or the things that they exhibited around you, their moods, etc., their belief systems, you can only work on dismantling what has come through to you, and that has to be your responsibility to do that. But you cannot work on dismantling their issues for them. You can learn about the reasons why they may have behaved in certain ways, and for a lot of people that is very helpful. Examining my parents' childhoods, their upbringings and what they went through was incredibly instrumental for me in terms of recognising why they did the things they did, and that helped me to break down and process a lot of my anger about some of the ways that they behaved when I was growing up and stuff, right? So it can be useful for you to understand the origin stories of your parents, absolutely, but it is not down to you to process those origin stories and deal with that stuff. You have to deal only with what's come through to you. And if your parents are not prepared to do the work that they may need to do to heal and to get over their pain, that is for them to contend with. There is nothing that you can do to ensure that they experience the fullness of healing. That's got to be a decision that they come to for themselves, and this can be a very painful thing to recognize, but I thought it was worth it to end the video on that point, because I think it's something a lot of people do forget, and they do try to do their parents' healing or their parents' realization or their parents' release work or their parents' integration of shadow, and we cannot do that, sadly. But what we can do is focus on the work we can get done and the work we can decide that we're going to carry out for ourselves. And I hope this video will help you in doing your work, if that's where you are right now and if that's why you're watching this resource. So much love, guys, until the next video. As I said at the beginning, really enjoying talking about these things, and I would love to know your experiences down in the comments when it comes to inheriting negative traits from your parents and what your experiences have been with that. Much love and self-love. Blessed be.